Michael Mitke is no longer facing just 2 charges related to this case. What began as a developing investigation has now escalated into something far more serious. A grand jury in Franklin County, Ohio, where the city of Columbus is located, has formally handed down a 5-count indictment against Mitke, dramatically expanding the scope of the allegations. According to newly released court records, Mitke now faces 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. This indictment represents a major shift in the prosecution's case and reveals new details about what investigators believe happened during the early morning hours of December 30th, when Monique and Spencer Teepee were killed inside their home. At the moment, Michael Mitke remains behind bars in Winnebago County Jail in Illinois, located in Rockford, roughly an hour and a half west of Chicago. Before his arrest, Mitke worked as a vascular surgeon, a highly specialized medical profession that requires years of education, precision, and trust. Columbus police confirmed that he was taken into custody near his place of employment by federal ATF agents. Mitke is currently awaiting extradition to Ohio, where he will ultimately stand trial for the deaths of his ex-wife, Monique Teepee, and her husband, Spencer. Investigators say the killings occurred while the couple's young children were inside the home, a detail that has deeply shaken the community and intensified public reaction. As more information emerges, a troubling question continues to surface. How does someone go from a respected medical career to being accused of a calculated double homicide? That question sits at the center of this case. Mitke's professional background only adds to the shock. As a vascular surgeon, his job involved operating on veins and arteries, work that demands extraordinary discipline and mental control. Colleagues and neighbors described him as intelligent and outwardly composed. Yet investigators now allege that behind that exterior, something far darker was unfolding. Authorities have emphasized that this was not a random act of violence. During a press conference, Columbus police made it clear they believe the attack was targeted and rooted in domestic violence. Mitke's connection to the victims stems from his past marriage to Monique, whose maiden name was Sabatersky. The two were married briefly, divorcing in 2017, after just 2 years together. Court records initially suggested an amicable separation, citing incompatibility as the reason for divorce. However, investigators now believe unresolved issues may have lingered long after the legal relationship ended. After the divorce, Monique rebuilt her life. She later married Spencer Teepee, a dentist, and together they had 2 young children. From the outside, it appeared that both individuals had moved on, Mitke continuing his medical career across several states, and Monique focusing on her family in Ohio. But police say everything changed on December 30th. The first indication something was wrong came not from family members, but from Spencer Teepee's workplace. When he failed to show up for work, something described as completely out-of-character concern escalated quickly. Calls went unanswered. Family members could not be reached. Eventually, a welfare check was requested. When officers arrived, the situation took a devastating turn. Inside the home, both Spencer and Monique were found on the 2nd floor, each suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Emergency calls captured the panic and confusion of those discovering the scene, moments that would later become critical evidence in the case. Initially, Mitke was charged with 2 counts of murder. Those charges were later upgraded to aggravated murder. Now, with the grand jury indictment, prosecutors have expanded the case further, signaling their belief that the killings were premeditated and involved forced entry. As the investigation deepens, law enforcement continues to piece together Mitke's movements, communications, and actions leading up to that night, building what they say is a strong case supported by surveillance footage, vehicle data, and physical evidence. This is only the beginning of a case that continues to unfold, and the indictment marks a turning point that could carry the most severe penalties under Ohio law. To understand how this case reached such a devastating outcome, investigators have been closely examining Michael Mitke's past, particularly his relationship with Monique Teepee, in the years following their divorce. While court records initially painted the separation as routine and non-confrontational, people close to the situation suggest there may have been deeper issues that never fully disappeared. Michael Mitke and Monique, whose maiden name was Sabatersky, met while both were students at Ohio State University. They were roughly the same age and, by all outward appearances, shared a promising future. Mitke went on to medical school at Ohio State, graduating in 2014, while Monique pursued her own path. The couple married in August of 2015, celebrating what many assumed would be the beginning of a long life together. Shortly after their wedding, the newlyweds moved to Virginia, where Mitke began an intensive vascular surgery residency. The demands of that program were significant, requiring long hours, constant pressure, and extreme focus. During this time, the couple purchased a home together, seemingly settling into married life while Mitke worked toward the peak of his medical career. However, according to court documents, the marriage unraveled quickly, less than 2 years later. On May 2, 2017, Monique filed for divorce in Franklin County, Ohio. The paperwork stated that she had been living in Ohio for at least 6 months prior to filing, while McKay remained in Virginia to complete his residency. The divorce filing noted that there were no children and no pregnancy, and cited the reason for separation simply as incompatibility. Within weeks, the divorce was finalized. The decree, signed by both parties in June of 2017, formally ended the marriage. McKay retained the Virginia home, while each party kept their own vehicle. The process was swift and uncontested, something family law experts say often indicates both parties were eager to move on. On paper, the divorce appeared clean and unemotional, but investigators now believe that legal closure may not have equaled emotional closure. In the years that followed, Monique rebuilt her life in Ohio. She later married Spencer Teepee, a dentist described by colleagues as reliable, hardworking, and devoted to his family. The couple married in 2020 and welcomed children, creating what friends described as a loving and stable household. McKay, meanwhile, continued advancing his medical career. After completing his residency, he pursued additional fellowship training and worked in multiple medical facilities across the country. At one point, he practiced in Maryland, later moving to Las Vegas, where he joined a surgical group. But cracks in that professional trajectory soon began to appear. In 2024, a medical malpractice lawsuit was filed involving a procedure performed at the Las Vegas practice where McKay worked. While McKay was not accused of personally performing the procedure, the lawsuit alleged that a physician's assistant under his supervision improperly inserted a catheter during a 2023 procedure. According to the complaint, part of the catheter broke off and remained inside the patient's body, causing complications. McKay was named in the lawsuit due to his alleged responsibility for training the assistant. What raised further concern was not just the lawsuit itself, but McKay's apparent reaction to it. Court records show that attempts to serve McKay with updated legal paperwork repeatedly failed. Beginning in late September, approximately 3 months before the murder's process, servers made multiple visits to addresses associated with McKay in Las Vegas. In one instance, a television could be heard inside the residence, but no one answered. The door even more alarming. When representatives contacted the medical practice where McKay had worked, they were reportedly told that no one knew where he was. One doctor allegedly said McKay had simply disappeared. Records also revealed that McKay's Nevada medical license had expired during that same period. This sudden vanishing act stood in stark contrast to McKay's previous image as a disciplined and accountable surgeon. For investigators, it raised critical questions about what was happening in his life during the months leading up to December 30th. Eventually, McKay resurfaced in Illinois, living in a high-end condominium in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood while working at a medical facility in Rockford. Neighbors later described him as quiet, polite, and often alone, nothing about his demeanor hinting at the accusations that would soon follow. From the outside, it appeared that both Monique and McKay had gone their separate ways years earlier, but prosecutors now believe those paths may have collided again, in a violent and tragic way, setting the stage for what they describe as a targeted, premeditated attack. The morning of December 30th began like any other workday until something immediately felt wrong. Spencer Teepee, known by coworkers as dependable and punctual, failed to arrive at his dental office. Calls to his phone went unanswered. Messages to family members also received no response. As concern mounted, his employer made the decision that would ultimately uncover a horrifying truth. A 911 call was placed requesting a welfare check at the Teepee residence. The caller explained that Spencer had never missed work without notice, and that no one had been able to contact him or his wife. The despacho was informed that 2 young children lived in the home, heightening the urgency of the situation. Police were dispatched to the address, though the initial responding officer mistakenly went to the wrong location. During that delay, a close friend of the family arrived at the Teepee home. Equally worried after being unable to reach the couple, or that friend discovered inside would quickly escalate the call from a welfare check to a homicide investigation. Inside the residence, Spencer Teepee was found deceased in an upstairs bedroom. The discovery triggered frantic emergency calls as authorities rushed to the scene. Moments later, police confirmed that both Spencer and Monique Teepee had been located on the 2nd floor of the home, each suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. First responders secured the scene as investigators began documenting evidence. There were no immediate signs of forced entry, a detail that would later become a central mystery in the case. The couple's children were inside the home at the time of the attack, but were physically unharmed, an aspect investigators described as both heartbreaking and deeply disturbing. As detectives processed the crime scene, it became clear that this was not a random burglary or spontaneous act of violence. Law enforcement quickly began focusing on individuals who had prior connections to the victims. Almost immediately, attention turned to Monique's ex-husband, Michael McKay. Investigators obtained surveillance footage from cameras positioned throughout the neighborhood. The video showed a person dressed entirely in dark clothing moving through an alley behind the teepee home during the early morning hours. Between approximately 2 o'clock and 5 a.m., the same window in which authorities believe the murders occurred, the individual appeared to deliberately avoid facing the cameras. After moving through the alley, the person was seen entering a vehicle that had arrived shortly before the shootings and departed soon after. That vehicle became a critical piece of the investigation. Through license plate readers and additional surveillance footage, police tracked the vehicle as it left the Columbus area and traveled out of state. Records showed the car was registered to Michael McKay. Authorities later confirmed the vehicle was located in Illinois, further strengthening their suspicion. On January 10th, approximately 10 days after the murders, McKay was arrested near his workplace in Rockford, Illinois. Federal ATF agents assisted in the arrest, and McKay was taken into custody without incident. He was booked into the Winnebago County Jail shortly after midnight. At the time of his arrest, police initially charged McKay with 2 counts of murder. Those charges were soon elevated to aggravated murder as investigators continued analyzing evidence. Law enforcement officials expressed confidence during a press conference, stating they believed they had identified the correct suspect. Following McKay's arrest, police executed a search warrant at his Chicago condominium. Inside the apartment, officers discovered multiple firearms. According to Columbus police, one of those weapons may be directly linked to the crime scene, though full forensic analysis was still underway at the time. Investigators also recovered shell casings from the teepee home, suggesting the firearm used had been brought to the scene and removed afterward. This finding, combined with the lack of forced entry, further supported the theory that the attack was planned rather than spontaneous. The case took another significant turn when a Franklin County grand jury returned a 5-count indictment against McKay. The indictment included 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary, signaling prosecutors' belief that McKay unlawfully entered the home with the intent to cause harm. Perhaps the most striking detail in the indictment was a specification stating that McKay allegedly possessed a firearm equipped with a silencer or suppressor during the commission of the crime. If proven, this detail could dramatically impact the severity of potential sentencing. Despite these developments, major questions remain unanswered. Chief among them how the suspect allegedly gained access to the home without any sign of forced entry. Police have acknowledged that this detail is still under investigation, as McKay remains in custody awaiting extradition to Ohio. Prosecutors continue assembling what they describe as a comprehensive case built on surveillance footage, vehicle tracking, forensic evidence, and digital records. The indictment marked a pivotal moment, but it is far from the final chapter, in a case that continues to raise unsettling questions about motive, planning, and the hidden tensions that may have led to a tragic and irreversible outcome. With Michael McKay now facing a 5-count indictment, legal experts say the case has entered a far more serious phase. The upgraded charges reveal how prosecutors interpret the evidence and what they believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt when the case eventually goes to trial. The indictment handed down by a Franklin County grand jury includes 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. Under Ohio law, aggravated murder is the most severe homicide charge and is reserved for killings that involve specific aggravating factors, such as prior calculation, multiple victims, or the use of certain weapons. In this case, prosecutors allege that McKay intentionally caused the deaths of 2 separate individuals, Monique and Spencer Teepee, in a single course of conduct. Because there were 2 victims, each death is charged in multiple ways, resulting in the 4 aggravated murder counts. While that may seem redundant, legal analysts explain that prosecutors often structure indictments this way to preserve multiple paths to conviction. The aggravated burglary charge carries its own significance. According to the indictment, McKay allegedly entered the teepee residence without privilege and with the intent to commit a violent offense inside. This charge directly challenges any argument that McKay may have been allowed inside or had lawful access to the home. Investigators have stated that there were no visible signs of forced entry. That fact has fueled widespread speculation about how the suspect may have gained access. Prosecutors have not publicly explained this detail, but the burglary charge suggests they believe McKay did not have permission to enter. Regardless of how he got inside, one of the most striking elements of the indictment is a firearm specification, alleging that McKay possessed a gun equipped with a silencer or a suppressor during the killings. Under Ohio law, this allegation, if proven, adds significant weight to the case. As suppressors are often associated with deliberate attempts to avoid detection, authorities have not released specific details about how they determined a suppressor may have been used. However, law enforcement sources have indicated that the lack of loud gunshot reports, combined with physical evidence recovered at the scene, contributed to that conclusion. Neighbors did not report hearing gunfire during the time investigators believe the murders occurred. If prosecutors successfully prove the suppressor allegation, it could increase McKay's potential sentence and further support their claim that the attack was carefully planned. Legal experts note that such specifications are typically only included when prosecutors feel confident they can back them up with forensic or expert testimony. McKay has not yet entered a plea in Ohio, as he remains in Illinois awaiting extradition. His defense team has not publicly commented on the details of the indictment, but criminal defense attorneys say several key strategies are likely to emerge as the case progresses. One anticipated focus will be intent. To secure a conviction for aggravated murder, prosecutors must show that the killings were purposeful and involve prior calculation. That means demonstrating more than a momentary decision or emotional outburst. Surveillance footage, travel records, and evidence of planning will all play a critical role. Another likely area of contention is the aggravated burglary charge. Defense attorneys may argue that the absence of forced entry creates reasonable doubt about whether McKay unlawfully entered the home. Prosecutors, on the other hand, appear prepared to argue that entry without permission, regardless of method, meets the legal definition of burglary. The presence of the children inside the home, while not a formal charge enhancement in this indictment, is expected to factor heavily into sentencing arguments if the case results in a conviction. Prosecutors have already described this detail as one of the most disturbing aspects of the crime. Meanwhile, the court system has begun laying the groundwork for what could be a lengthy and high-profile trial. Once extradited to Ohio, McKay will appear before a judge for arraignment, at which point he will formally respond to the charges. The court will also address bond, though aggravated murder charges often result in no bond being set. Public interest in the case continues to grow, fueled by the contrast between McKay's professional background and the allegations against him. The idea that a trained surgeon could be accused of such calculated violence has sparked intense debate and speculation. For now, prosecutors remain tight-lipped about many details, citing the ongoing investigation, but the expounded indictment makes one thing clear: the state is preparing to pursue this case aggressively and is signaling that it believes the evidence supports the most serious charges available under Ohio law. As investigators continue to assemble their case against Michael McKay, attention has increasingly turned toward one of the most difficult questions in any homicide investigation: why? While prosecutors have not publicly stated a definitive motive, the evidence they have revealed so far points toward a narrative rooted in unresolved conflict, control, and long-simmering resentment. Authorities have been careful with their language, but during early press briefings, Columbus police emphasized that they believe this was an act of targeted domestic violence, not a random crime. Now, that distinction is critical. It suggests investigators see a direct emotional and relational link between the suspect and at least one of the victims, namely McKay's former wife. Most single quotes in IQUE. Although the couple divorced in 2017, law enforcement sources say the passage of time does not automatically eliminate emotional ties or unresolved grievance. In some cases, experts explain, distance and silence can actually intensify fixation rather than diminish it. Monique's life after the divorce appeared, by most accounts, to be stable and fulfilling. She remarried, started a family, and built a new routine in Ohio. Friends described her as devoted to her children and deeply invested in her role as a mother. To those around her, the past felt firmly in the rearview mirror, but prosecutors may argue that McKay experienced those same developments very differently. Legal analysts suggest that McKay's professional struggles in the years leading up to the murders could play a role in the state's theory of motive. The malpractice lawsuit in Nevada, the expiration of his medical license, and his sudden disappearance from professional circles paint a picture of a career under stress. At the same time, Monique's life appeared to be moving forward both personally and professionally. Prosecutors may attempt to contrast these trajectories, arguing that McKay may have perceived his ex-wife's stability and happiness as a painful reminder of his own unraveling. Another potential factor investigators are examining is control. In many domestic violence cases, experts say the underlying issue is not anger alone but a desire to regain power over someone who has moved on. The fact that Monique had remarried and built a family with another man may have intensified those feelings, particularly if McKay believed he had been replaced or erased. The inclusion of aggravated burglary in the indictment also speaks to motive. Prosecutors are alleging that McKay did not simply encounter the victims but actively sought them out inside their own home, a place that should have been safe. That allegation supports a narrative of intent rather than coincidence. But possible use of a firearm equipped with a suppressor further reinforces the idea of planning. Suppressors are not commonly associated with impulsive acts of violence. Instead, prosecutors may argue that such a device indicates preparation, forethought, and an attempt to avoid detection. Defense attorneys, however, are expected to challenge every aspect of that narrative. Without a written confession or explicit statement of motive, the defense may argue that prosecutors are relying too heavily on circumstantial evidence and assumptions about emotional states. They may point out that many people experience divorce, professional setbacks, or personal disappointment without resorting to violence. Another anticipated defense strategy is to question the timeline and interpretation of surveillance footage. While the vehicle seen near the teepee home was allegedly registered to McKay, defense attorneys may argue that registration alone does not prove who was driving at the time. The lack of forced entry could also be leveraged by the defense. They may argue that the absence of damage or struggle suggests someone with access or familiarity entered the home, potentially raising alternative theories. Prosecutors, on the other hand, appear confident that entry without permission still meets the legal threshold for burglary. Experts also note that motive is not a legal requirement for conviction. Prosecutors are not obligated to prove why a defendant committed a crime, only that they did. However, in cases like this, establishing a compelling motive can help jurors make sense of complex and emotionally charged evidence. As the case moves forward, additional information may emerge through court filings, pretrial motions, and discovery. Digital evidence such as phone records, location data, and online activity could provide further insight into McKay's mindset in the days or weeks leading up to December 30th. For now, prosecutors are laying the foundation for a story they believe explains not just what happened, but why. Whether that story withstands scrutiny in court will ultimately determine the outcome of a case that has already left the community searching for answers. With Michael McKay now in custody, the focus has shifted from investigation to procedure. While the allegations themselves are severe, the legal process that follows is complex and methodical, particularly when a suspect is arrested in a different state than where the crimes allegedly occurred. McKay is currently being held in the Winnebago County Jail in Rockford, Illinois, where he was taken into custody shortly after his arrest. Because the charges against him were filed in Ohio, authorities must complete a formal extradition process before he can be transferred to Franklin County to face those charges in court. Extradition is governed by both state and federal law, and is typically a straightforward process when a defendant does not contest the transfer. In cases involving serious felony charges, especially aggravated murder, defendants often waive extradition, as fighting the transfer rarely changes the outcome and can simply delay the inevitable. If McKay chooses to contest extradition, the process could take longer, involving additional court hearings in Illinois. However, legal experts note that such challenges are rarely successful unless there is a clear procedural error. Ultimately, Ohio authorities are expected to secure custody and bring McKay back to Columbus. Once extradited, McKay will appear in a Franklin County courtroom for arraignment. During that hearing, a judge will formally read the charges, inform him of his rights, and ask for a plea. At that point, McKay will have the opportunity to plead guilty, not guilty, or stand mute, though standing mute typically results in a not guilty plea being entered on his behalf. Bond is another issue that will be addressed early in the process. Given the nature of the charges, 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary, legal analysts say it is highly likely that McKay will be held without bond. Ohio courts frequently deny bond in cases involving capital-level offenses, particularly when there is evidence suggesting flight risk or premeditation. Following arraignment, the case will move into the pretrial phase, where both sides exchange evidence through discovery. This is often when significant details become public. As defense attorneys file motions challenging the admissibility of certain evidence, such as surveillance footage, search warrants, or forensic findings, one key area of pretrial litigation may involve the firearms recovered from McKay's Chicago residence. Defense attorneys could challenge whether those weapons were legally seized and whether any of them can be conclusively linked to the crime scene. Prosecutors, meanwhile, will likely rely on ballistic analysis and expert testimony to establish that connection. Another potential battleground is digital evidence. Cell phone location data, license plate reader information, and electronic records could be used to place McKay near the teepee home at the relevant time. Defense teams often scrutinize such data closely, questioning accuracy, interpretation, and chain of custody. If the case proceeds to trial and McKay is convicted of aggravated murder, the potential penalties are severe. Under Ohio law, aggravated murder carries a possible sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, life with parole eligibility after a set number of years, or, in certain cases, the death penalty. Prosecutors have not publicly stated whether they intend to seek capital punishment. The presence of multiple victims, allegations of prior calculation, and the possible use of a firearm suppressor are all factors that could weigh heavily during sentencing. Even if the death penalty is not pursued, a conviction could result in McKay spending the remainder of his life behind bars. Throughout this process, the families of Monique and Spencer Teepee continue to navigate their own legal and emotional challenges. Court proceedings may include victim impact statements, custody considerations for the children, and civil actions related to the case. Public attention remains intense, with many closely watching how the justice system handles a case involving a defendant with such a high-profile professional background. The contrast between Mike's career as a surgeon and the allegations against him continues to fuel discussion and debate. As the legal machinery moves forward, prosecutors appear confident in the strength of their case. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, are expected to aggressively test every piece of evidence. The coming months will determine which narrative ultimately prevails in a courtroom and whether the evidence meets the high burden required for a conviction. As news of the charges against Michael McKay spread, the reaction from the community was swift and deeply emotional. For many residents in the quiet Ohio neighborhood where Monique and Spencer Teepee lived, the idea that such violence could occur so close to home shattered a long-held sense of security. Neighbors described the Teepees as friendly and approachable, the kind of family that blended seamlessly into the community. They were often seen walking with their children, exchanging greetings, and participating in everyday routines that felt ordinary until they suddenly weren't. In the aftermath of the killings, flowers and handwritten notes appeared near the home, serving as visible reminders of a loss that felt both personal and collective. Friends and colleagues of Spencer Teepee expressed disbelief. At his dental practice, coworkers remembered him as reliable, professional, and kind. Patients described him as gentle and attentive, someone who took time to explain procedures and ease anxiety. His absence left a noticeable void not only in the workplace, but in the lives of those who depended on him. Monique's friends shared similar memories. They spoke of her dedication to her children and her resilience in building a new life after her divorce. To those who knew her well, she embodied determination and optimism, focused on the future rather than the challenges of the past. The presence of the couple's young children inside the home at the time of the murders has been one of the most emotionally charged aspects of the case. While the children were physically unharmed, experts note that exposure to such trauma can have long-lasting psychological effects. Community members have rallied around extended family, offering support and resources to help the children through an unimaginable loss. Media coverage of the case has been extensive, both locally and nationally. Headlines often highlight the contrast between McKay's career as a surgeon and the allegations he now faces. That juxtaposition has fueled public debate about how someone trained to save lives could be accused of taking them in such a calculated way. Legal analysts appearing in media interviews have emphasized the importance of separating professional identity from criminal allegations. While McKay's background adds an unusual dimension to the case, experts caution that jurors must focus on evidence rather than assumptions or shock value. At the same time, the case has sparked broader conversations about domestic violence, particularly in situations where relationships ended years earlier. Advocates point out that separation or divorce does not always eliminate risk, and that lingering control issues can resurface in dangerous ways. The case has also raised ethical questions within the medical community. While McKay is presumed innocent until proven guilty, some have questioned how warning signs such as sudden professional disappearance or licensing issues might be better addressed in high-responsibility professions. Medical boards and hospitals across the country are closely watching how this case unfolds. Online discussion has been intense, with speculation, theories, and emotional reactions flooding social media. Law enforcement officials have urged the public to avoid spreading unverified information, reminding people that misinformation can complicate ongoing investigations and legal proceedings. For prosecutors, public reaction is a secondary concern. Their focus remains on building a case that can withstand scrutiny in court. Still, they have acknowledged the emotional weight of the situation, particularly given the impact on the victims' families and the children left behind. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, face the challenge of representing a client in a case that has already drawn widespread attention. Legal experts note that high-profile cases often require careful jury selection to ensure fairness and impartiality, especially when public opinion has already been shaped by media narratives. As the case moves closer to trial, the courtroom will become the primary arena where facts are examined and arguments tested. Outside that setting, the community continues to grieve and reflect, grappling with the reality that violence can emerge even in places that feel safe. The deaths of Monique and Spencer Teepee have left an enduring mark not just on their loved ones, but on a wider community forced to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, safety, and the hidden struggles that can exist beneath the surface of everyday life. As the case against Michael McKay moves forward, many questions remain unanswered. While prosecutors have laid out a framework they believe explains what happened on December 30th, the full story has yet to be tested in a courtroom. Until that process unfolds, much of what the public knows comes from indictments, court filings, and statements made during press conferences. What is clear, however, is that this case has already left a lasting impact. The deaths of Monique and Spencer Teepee were not only a personal tragedy for their families, but also a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary lives can be shattered. Two people who were raising children, building careers, and planning for the future were suddenly gone, leaving behind grief that words can barely capture. From a legal perspective, the road ahead is long. Once extradited to Ohio, McKay will face a series of hearings that will determine how and when the case proceeds. Pretrial motions could take months, possibly longer, as both sides argue over evidence, procedure, and constitutional issues. Only after those matters are resolved would a trial date be set. If the case goes to trial, jurors will be asked to evaluate complex evidence, surveillance footage, vehicle data, forensic findings, and testimony from experts and witnesses. They will also be tasked with separating emotion from fact on, especially a difficult challenge in a case involving young children, domestic history, and allegations of careful planning. For prosecutors, the goal will be to present a clear, coherent narrative that demonstrates intent and prior calculation. They will argue that the evidence shows a deliberate act, not an accident or misunderstanding. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, are expected to challenge that narrative at every step, raising doubts about interpretation, timeline, and proof. Regardless of the outcome, the case has already prompted broader discussions. It has renewed focus on the complexities of domestic violence, particularly when it involves former partners and long periods of separation. Experts continue to emphasize that emotional ties do not always end with legal ones, and that warning signs can sometimes go unnoticed until it is too late. The case has also highlighted the pressure and scrutiny placed on professionals in higher responsibility roles. While a person's career does not determine guilt or innocence, it can shape public perception in powerful ways. This dynamic underscores the importance of due process and the principle that every defendant is entitled to a fair trial. For the Teepee children, the future will look very different than anyone could have imagined. Their lives have been irrevocably altered, and their well-being will remain a central concern for extended family and the court system. Community members have expressed hope that they will be surrounded by stability, care, and support in the years ahead. As media coverage continues, law enforcement officials have urged patience and restraint. Investigations and trials unfold in stages, and conclusions reached too early can be misleading. The justice system, though often slow, is designed to carefully weigh evidence before reaching a verdict that carries permanent consequences. In the end, this case serves as a sobering reminder that the most disturbing stories are often those that unfold quietly, without warning, behind closed doors and familiar routines. Conflicts can grow unnoticed, sometimes with tragic results, as the legal process continues. The focus remains on accountability, truth, and justice for Monique, for Spencer, and for the children, whose lives were forever changed. Whatever the final verdict may be, the hope is that the truth, once fully examined, will bring some measure of clarity and closure to a case that has left so many searching for answers.